Facebook page says, Kathy, I think they're coming for your restaurant, so there's nothing I could do about it. And someone sent me a video, but in the video that they sent me, all those protesters, I used to take my cart and roll it down the street and I would feed them. And those protesters protected Kathy's Kitchen. Yeah. So it was the first time that the narrative of the protesters were shown in a positive light. Everything you had seen about them was totally negative. And so I did suffer one loss. Someone had picked up the table I had in front of the restaurant and thrown it through the window. But on the video, they're literally wrestling the guy down, and you could hear them screaming, "No, not Kathy's." And so the next day when we came to assess the damages, had no idea that I was going to meet Aeneas Williams. He's standing right in front of my restaurant, cutting plywood to board up my window. And so when we walk inside the restaurant, totally intact. I mean, perfectly, other than the glass in the window there. And the reporter said, "Wow, so you're Kathy, you know Aeneas Williams?" I just met him right here. I said, "But hey, I've got this video if you want it." So I gave him the video. And lo and behold, Anderson Cooper gets the video. And he's like, "Oh, I've got to have you on the show." So I went on the show, and so he showed the entire world that it was just people standing up for their rights. So it was a pivotal moment for our restaurant to get worldwide recognition. And we kind of really haven't slowed down since then. Everyone comes in the restaurant. So I love that I was a part of that my kindness, that they paid it forward to me, you know. So I didn't know that was going to happen. So it was a blessing for me.
And Aeneas Williams, for those who aren't from St. Louis, I mean, he's a former St. Louis Ram.
Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer. And he has a church, a ministry in St. Charles. And that's, I had never heard that story, Kathy.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so again, you know, from both of you, coming through a pandemic. I mean, Bethany, when was it that you went, it's about to change?
March 15th, 2020. Yeah, we knew it right away. I have to tell you, that weekend we were very, very busy, and my mother said something to me. She said, "None of these people are keeping distance from each other." And that wasn't talked about yet. The next day it was talked about. And when the city of St. Louis, you know, put out the information that, you know, what this pandemic could be doing, or it wasn't quite a pandemic yet, I had to step back and say, I'm gonna close down. We didn't have to close down yet, but I thought, you know, I need to take a week. I need to figure out what's gonna be safest for the staff, safest for our guests, safest for our family. And so we closed for an entire 8 weeks.
Wow.
Yep.
Was that a hard conversation?
It was very,
you had to...
It was very hard. My husband and I, we made sure that our staff had food, that they had as much pay as we could give them. We did a lot of interior work that only, you know, 4 or 5 of us needed to be in there for, you know, so we were able to do shifts and keep folks employed a bit. But yeah, it happened right away. It looked like it was something was gonna change.
Wow.
Yep.
And Kathy, how did you guys walk that walk?
Oh my God, now we didn't close. And now, let me go back a little bit. When the unrest happened with Mike Brown, after that, everyone was coming all over the world. It was great, it was exciting. Then all of a sudden, no one was coming to Ferguson. Totally dead. We were barely keeping our doors open in the business. No one wanted to come. They thought it was dangerous. They thought it was all this. So we had to come up with an idea, which my husband came up with. Jerome, he's over there. Wave at him, Jerome.
Hey, Jerome.
He says, we need to introduce delivery or something into the business so we can get more money into the restaurant. And back then, Uber Eats was the only one, and they didn't want to offer it in our community. And so we just kind of stayed at it, and they finally said they will do it. And then once Uber Eats and Postmates, everyone else came on, we were the first in our community to have that. And that, because we had that when the pandemic happened, we were already 3 steps ahead of everyone. No one really wanted to change the old ways of how they did a restaurant. They wanted everyone to only come in, sit down, and dine. But because we were already in a crisis before that, we were already ready to set up for delivery. Oh gosh, we couldn't believe how many tickets we had. I mean, we had so many, we never closed. And the great thing about that was I had my family. So, you know, people were afraid to send their kids and stuff, which I understood. I always say they made COVID be the super villain of all times. It could stay on surfaces 72 hours. It could leak tall buildings, you know. It could do everything. So it was the scariest thing you had ever seen. So I understood why people didn't want to send their family to work, but I had my family. So my kids were home from college because everybody was afraid of what was happening. So I had a crew, my family. And so we were able to keep our doors open the entire time. And like I had said, then we were able to feed the community too. So I made chicken noodle soup. I did everything, hot dogs. I did everything for people to come and get free food because I understood the crisis we were in. So yeah, we were able to grow during COVID.
Nicole, how am I doing? Okay. What was like the mistake you put on a menu and went, I thought it would work, but it didn't?
Oh, God. My brother-in-law, Matt, chicken adobe.
Matt?
No, I'm kidding. Wow. I mean, I think, you know, honestly, there's been some faux pas, definitely. I would have to say that we tried our best to replicate a spanakopita, you know, with phyllo dough and you know, just doing it right. We're not a Greek restaurant, I promise you. That was it. That was a bad one.
Anything for you, Kathy? Or?
You know what, and it didn't do well, but I thought it was a great sandwich. We did a fried green tomato sandwich. Who doesn't like fried green tomatoes?
Yeah,
Right.
And
Put
I
'em on a
just knew,
BLT.
and I said, you know what? I said, gosh, they're gonna, you know, the vegetarians, and oh, they're gonna love this. Didn't do anything. Only I loved it.
So what's your favorite ingredient? What's the one thing that you go, I'm inspired, I can do this or I can do that? For me, it's a tomato for some reason.
That you can do,
If
make
it's
the
a
most
if it's a
out of.
tomato that has grown out of a garden, oh, I am on the sauce, I am making soup, I am inspired, you know. Is there anything that kind of like really
Chicken.
pushes your soul like that?
Chicken. I feel like you can do everything with chicken. You can soup, salad, sandwiches, and you can make it all taste different. You can season it up, and then you can make it Italian, and now it's Mexican. You know, it's Spanish. You can do so much with chicken. I love chicken.
Yeah, I like chicken. And I like eggs. My friend Chris, he has eggs, he has chickens. And like, I'm like, hey, Chris, you know, 1, 2, what can I get? An egg, a fresh egg is the most wonderful experience. I'm so easy. I told you I like to eat, so I mean, I'm an expert in this. It's scientific. So Bethany, what's your favorite ingredient?
Oh, I would have to say artichokes.
Really?
You think about an artichoke and all you can do is steam them. That is not true. Cut them in half. You can braise them in stock. You know, then you can eat the entire artichoke. You know, you're not, you know, missing out on, you know, the stems can be eaten then. They're super tender. And then you've got the artichoke hearts that could go in all kinds of other different recipes. I mean, there's a really great use for them.
Cool. What's your favorite restaurant? Here, anywhere in the world?
So it is not open any longer, and it's local.
That was safe.
Yep. Duff's in the West End.
Yeah.
That was our go-to once a week.
A lot of people like that.
Yeah.
Kathy, yours?
I do have Bush's Grove. I used to love
Oh,
Bush's
yeah.
Grove. Yeah, I used to love there. I used to get the pecan tilapia with the Cobb salad and the duckling spring rolls.
Nice.
I love that place.
Yesterday it was funny when we had dinner. It was like, you know how difficult it's got to be to cook for a chef or a restaurant owner? I mean, I wouldn't want to do it.
It's not that difficult.
But they're very gracious.
Yeah. We both had a great time last night.
It was
Yep.
fun.
We had a good time.
So what's your go-to food? Like mine is peanut butter and jelly. If I had one food, you know, after the nuclear attack, it's got to be peanut butter and jelly.
That's a good one.
I think I'm nuts. lots of different nuts. Yep.
Well, you know, mine used to be nuts and popcorn, and I totally found out I had allergies, food allergies. And I honestly feel like I'm still trying to find my way. You know, I miss them so much, you know. I'm like, nothing's that good and crunchy, and it's, you know, not fattening. I don't want to eat cheese. I don't want to. It's very difficult to find for me right now. And I literally just found that out probably about a year ago. You know, so kind of like y'all like peanut butter. So I'm like in a bad spot right now.
You got to get claimed by some easy
spot.
food out there. Okay, I think I'm almost wrapped up, but if there's a question out there, I do want to get you guys engaged. If anybody just had a burning question for well, like, where's your restaurant at? How can I get there tonight? I tried to help you.
Great.
But no, it's really been great talking to you. Again, I said, you know, I love a restaurant. I love, you know, the fact that people have that courage. I just would not. I can barely cook in my home and have you come. So I admire what you do and what you contribute to the world, and wish you the very best. And nobody look in my bag, because you cannot have it. I will share some cookies, but thank you so much.
Good work. All right.
Thank you, Adela, Bethany, and Kathy. When we hold Geography 2050 every November in New York, the lightning talks are some of the most popular presentations of the symposium. Today we have 4 for you, 2 right now and 2 a bit later. The presenters are underneath a lot of pressure. They have 20 slides and 5 minutes, but they are not in control of their slides. They are automatically being forwarded every 15 seconds, so there is no room for error like the problem that I had earlier. To start us off is Dr. Alan Trapp, who is going to talk to us about empowering ESG efforts with geospatial agility.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alan. I like numbers, and I'm going to talk about feet. Well, I'm inclusive. I'm going to talk about baby feet, like farmers, and I'm going to talk about big feet, or adult feet, like Enterprise's ExxonMobil. Particularly, we're going to be talking about how does this relate to this idea of greenhouse gases, because each cares about what this means to their environmental, social, and governmental goals that they've set. Now, if there's one thing you walk away from this conversation today, it is that this measurement process is very complex, and object computing has a way to measure this efficiently and quickly. But I'm going to aim for a little bit more. Number one, you'll know that enterprises are seeking something that's accurate and going to be useful for them. Number two, you're going to learn about the state-of-the-art model GREET. And then number three, we're going to be talking about a web-based application that makes this easy and consumable for anybody, not just farmers, but also enterprise, and how this relates to Google and AI. Now, in recent news, there's been this talk about renewable energies, particularly biofuel, and saying that it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's not just about how it gets burned and how much greenhouse is emitted from that burning. It's a whole process when they talk about the reduction. It's this idea of farm to the customer. It's holistic. Now, the recent news says that these biofuels in soy actually are 80% reduction to conventional fuels. Pretty impressive. But you know, if you want to aim a little bit bigger and make that 20% lower, where would you go in this journey to make it lower? Well, on the farm actually can contribute up to 20% of that. And yes, that makes sense if you talk about equipment, but did you know that there are other factors like what's your crop rotation, what's your type of irrigation practice, or other things like cover crop that affect that? All in all, it's an end-to-end process, as I said, in that there's these last 2 steps of transportation you consider and refining. Now, how do we get to this is through this idea of a GREET model. This GREET model stands for greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, energy use, and transportation. Quite a mouthful. This is a state-of-the-art model from Agronomy National Labs that's used to estimate greenhouse gas emissions using various levels of geospatial data, whether it's state level, resolution that is used in C Club, all the way down to the field level, which is used by this LMC model. All in all, we can make this really, really fast if we can get this data really quickly, like using satellite imageries or sensory data at a very high resolution, and getting to more accurate, more precise estimation of what that greenhouse gas actually is. Well, we did that. Welcome to GREET. This is the farmer tool that calculates carbon emissions, or more precisely, the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, how do you use this? You gotta know where's your field. You have to be able to define where is it that you're gonna be doing this calculation. It could be small, it could be big, and essentially, how much greenhouse gas are you going to be doing when you toggle all these switches around what is your farming management practices. Like I said earlier, it could be related to the cover crop all the way down to what is the nitrogen application you use. That's that configure growing season button right there. That's how this makes it happen. It's not just for one field. You can do this over multiple fields, or you could do this for multiple seasons. Now, this is an interpretable thing. How do we make it interpretable? If you're a farmer, you know what fertilizer is, you know what is your cover crop, you know what type of nitrogen fertilizer or what type of application you'll be doing. This takes it to farmer land. That's the intent. It has to be useful. Behind the scenes, we have all this AI, and we have these satellite data that's coming in and feeding in addition to that to make it more personalized, so that you can test out different types of combinations to get to a smaller greenhouse gas footprint. You can see there for 2. That is the end of my presentation. I hope that you could walk away and understand that we can empower farmers with this application so they can see how changes to their management practices actually affect their carbon footprint. And then furthermore, it provides a carbon emissions data for enterprises' sustainable goals. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Trapp. Perfect. And next in line is Mr. Peter Webb, who is going to discuss cultivating climate literacy, greenhouses as tools for understanding geography's role.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Webb. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mars Farm Corporation. I was born and raised in St. Louis. I was homeschooled K through 12, and then actually went to UMSL, where I got my degree in business. Started Mars Farm in 2020. My co-founder, Drew Thomas. We're about 2 miles away from here in an area called Overland, where we manufacture and sell these countertop-sized little greenhouses that control climate. So climate's complex. Temperature and humidity are just 2 components. Another one's light. This larger map here shows you the daylight integral. So that's the cumulative amount of light that reaches a given area for all 12 months of the year. When we zoom in on St. Louis, we see that the DLI changes a lot over the course of a year. Down near the bottom, we've got leafy greens. Up at the top, fruits, things where we're getting further down the reproductive cycle, like a pepper, a cucumber, a tomato. It takes more light to make more calories. So this has a lot to do with where we end up producing our fruits and vegetables all across the United States. There's another big factor, though, in that, outside of just geography, and that is the plant itself, and which part of it do we eat? So if we eat the leaves of a plant, yes, it might grow faster, and yes, it might require less light, but that also means it's going to spoil much faster. So what this creates is an opportunity in some crops. Take mustard or collard greens. 50% of those are thrown away by retailers in the United States. 50% of all of the product they put on their shelf, they throw away. So that's an opportunity for them to not do that if that food was grown much closer to them. That picture you're seeing is Wagenhagen in the Netherlands. Those are greenhouses, all producing the peppers you would get if you went to Schnucks right now. We, in the United States and all over the world, there's a great deal of focus on how do we maximize the light. You know, how do we get more out of the same amount of light? One way you can do that is by increasing the CO2, actually. So at about 1,000 parts per million of CO2, you can double the efficiency of a plant's growth rate. This is an industry that's fascinating to me, but I was just a kid. And so I found the world of open source software, hardware, and thankfully, online forums filled with makers, hackers, and biologists, where we could hack away developing little boxes, controlled environment greenhouses to grow plants. The idea was that if we could figure this out on a small scale, we could replay these recipes on a medium, say a shipping container farm at Maryville, or a much larger scale like AeroFarms. But how do we make this easy to access? So we developed a minimum viable product, and that means the cheapest example of a way to make a box that would have a computer control it, and it would grow plants. So for $300, we put these designs online, and about 500 people all around the world built those in less than a year. We found a lot of those people were teachers, they were schools, and these schools reached out to us and wanted to buy 10, 20 of those kits at a time. And that's when we created Mars Farm as a business. And now we focus on serving the market of agriculture education. The largest student organization in the United States is the Future Farmers of America. But ag tech hasn't made its way into ag ed. And that's where we see a real opportunity to modernize greenhouses, not with LEDs at scale, but with small, iterative versions of greenhouses. These are students that took 7th in the nation for the FFA AgriScience Fair last year. They used 6 Mars farms to compare whether it was better to have more intense lights for less time or less intense lights for more time. We work with citizen science programs that interpret the light settings used on the International Space Station so that we can mimic those and replay them in countertop-sized greenhouses all around the world. We're in about 500 schools right now, and this is a partnership we have with the Botanical Garden in Miami, Florida. And the data collected by the students, how well those plants did, that data is all used by NASA to determine which plants they'll then grow using those same light settings on the ISS. We've taken this further, and now we've added other controls, like irrigation and control of temperature, so that we can increase the temperature and have students in their elevated CO2 environments, which are classrooms, they can learn about plants in a way that is fast. When you see a GIF or a time lapse of a plant as a student, it becomes much more easy to understand how what you did 2 weeks ago had an impact. It's much harder to try to remember what happened last semester. And we think this is the way that not only as a business, but as an industry, we should move forward. That really by focusing on education and focusing on small iterative versions of growth chambers, we can then scale much larger and replay those recipes that we learned about by looking at the environment and climate and replay them on a large scale. Thank you so much.
The lightnings continue to be among the best presentations. I wish he was here when we had all that dead silence. It would have answered Dee's question. That was great. Thank you. We're going to take a brief 30-minute break. We'll come back here around 3 o'clock, and we'll finish off with the afternoon. Will everybody please be seated? And now AGS Chairman Dr. Chris Tucker is going to moderate a panel that we've named The Future of Surf and Turf, How the Midwest Can Have It All. Chris?
That's right. I was going to call it some riff on hibachi, and you'll find out in a minute why. Thanks so much, John, for giving us the stage. I have the distinct pleasure to hang out with two very fascinating people today. We always like to mix it up a little bit at the AGS. So one of our truly inspiring speakers from the fall at our New York City event from Mexico was willing to come back and share his message with our group here in St. Louis today. Daniel Rusick, who's CEO of Ataraya. I did not roll my R correctly with that, and my Spanish teacher would be very embarrassed for me. And then Dr. Brian Wiegand, who is director of the Division of Animal Sciences at University of Missouri in Columbia, is going to bring it back to Missouri for us after Daniel takes us on a whirlwind tour of, honestly, the world of shrimp. Daniel is an innovator with a company with a product. Is it still called Shrimp Box? Can I say that?
It is.
And he's going to tell you about kind of the cutting edge of protein production that is portable to anywhere on the planet in the form of shrimp using the magic of shipping containers. But it's not just like the product offering, it's kind of the philosophy and the worldview behind it that I find so fascinating. And then after Daniel, Brian didn't know he was a geography professor. But when we were talking about him potentially joining this panel, he gave me the biggest damn geography lesson of my life. Really centered in Missouri, it's kind of heartland, the meat production side of Missouri heartland. So I'm excited for this, and then we're going to go Q&A. So we're going to sit here and just talk like we're talking in our living room, except for it's much more inspiring. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. So that panel that we had in the fall inspired this video. So I decided that I just might as well just share it. It's short, I promise.
We live in strange times. Our relationship with food is complicated. The more we know about it, the less we enjoy it. We feel guilty about the impact of producing the very thing that sustains us. There has to be a better way. For over 10 years, Ataraya has been developing a realistic, scalable, and sustainable alternative to one of the most damaging and popular food staples on the planet, shrimp. In 2022, we shared our vision with the world, a vision which makes sense not in 10 or even 5 years, but right now. Here's a look back at what we've achieved this year. The American public met Shrimp Box, and they loved it. We refined our plug-and-play, hyper-modular, semi-automated farm that's up to 100 times more space efficient than traditional farming. It eliminates water discharge that harms the environment, and it cuts out antibiotics and preservatives, all while lowering production costs by 40% compared to any other inland alternative. In 6 months, we went from signing our warehouse lease to our first harvest. We proved that we can grow sustainable, local, and affordable shrimp with 3 times the shelf life anywhere in the world. And the world took notice. In 2023, we'll show how this solution scales in the United States. We'll build a template for a new food system which applies nature's wisdom to solve human challenges. A system that's transparent and inclusive, one that optimizes for efficiency, nutrition, and environmental impact, as well as our food growing and consumption experience. But we cannot do this alone. We want you to get involved. Visit www.atarraya.ai to learn more.
So this is our best shot at basically summarizing what the work we do. And I think that one of the reasons why Chris talks about our philosophy is because I've been working on this challenge for the past 17 years. I started working with economic development projects in the South Pacific coast of Mexico, in Oaxaca, which is the poorest state in our country. And it's been a very interesting and enlightening journey about what's wrong with our food system, right? And what are the challenges the people that are responsible for producing our food are facing. So, and we talk about a new food system, and we think that shrimp is a very good example of what's wrong, but also what can be done right. So we basically, our mission is to enable local shrimp farming anywhere in the world, and by then basically creating the first sustainable protein industry in the 21st century. So what's wrong with shrimp? And since we're in geography, this is a map. This is the map that I can present. And this is how seafood trade works, right? So we rely on a very complex network of trade in order to get our shrimp and our fish and most of our seafood. So, and that's a little bit ridiculous. If you think about, we don't rely on hunting buffaloes in the Midwest to get our burgers. So why are we hunting tuna in the middle of the Pacific to get our ceviche? So there are two ways for basically solving the shrimp need. One is wild catch, and shrimp, they don't swim. They basically walk in the ocean bed. So in order to get them, you basically need to throw a dragging net and destroy everything that comes with it. So if you would be conscious about, in order for you to really be conscious about the destruction that this brings, if you just have let's say a 1 pound shrimp to share, you would need basically another 15 pounds bowl of other stuff that are dead, that nobody's gonna eat ever, in order for you to get our wild-caught shrimp. And then you have shrimp farming. So shrimp farming, basically everywhere you have a mature industry of shrimp farms, you basically see destruction. These are located basically by mangrove forests. Mangrove forests are very important ecosystems. They capture 5 times as much carbon than any other forest in the world. They are basically the nursery of many of ocean life. So, it also, every shrimp farm discharges water on a scale comparable to a 500,000 people city. So, and both use allergenics that are basically dosed in Mexico or India or Ecuador. And farmers, they use typically 100 times the amount of potassium metabisulfite that the FDA considers safe. So, we decided that our goal was 12 years ago to be the first company to master the technology that will power the aquaculture industry forward. So, and then we created Shrimpbox. So Shrimpbox basically, it's in the form of a shipping container. It was never a shipping container. Like, these units have never been a shipping container because it's very complicated to manufacture 2 tanks in 1 shipping container. But it is in the geometry and with the specification of a 40-foot HQ shipping container, because then it's very cheap to move around. It has 2 tanks, and it yields 3,000 pounds of shrimp every year in 500 square feet, which would be, you would basically require about 2.5 acres in Ecuador to yield this. I made some calculations, and basically you would need about 80 acres of Shrimpbox to make St. Louis, Missouri self-sustainable in terms of shrimp. What else? So this is this was our first harvest in November. I hope that the video works. It doesn't. So, but trust me, this was a video of our VP Biotech Director that harvesting a bunch of shrimp. So so we have this farm in Indianapolis, so almost 4 hours from here. So now, if you want it, you can have locally raised shrimp from the Midwest. And our vision for Shrimpbox it's not only to grow shrimp, but it's a regenerative and circular way of producing food. Why? Because Shrimpbox relies on a technology that is called biofloc. Biofloc, it's basically microbial communities that are constantly capturing the nitrogen that is created in the system. By this I mean, if you have ever had a fish tank in your house, you have your fish and then you feed it, and after 2 or 3 days, if there's a window, more so if there's a window close by, the water will start to get green. Because shrimp, they metabolize the protein through their gills. So they exhale, along with carbon dioxide, they exhale ammonia. So this ammonia is basically a fertilizer, and anywhere in the world there is microalgae that populates the water column, and this is why it gets green. So we as shrimp farmers, we don't care if the water gets green, but after certain density is not the right word, concentration of ammonia, then it becomes toxic and it starts killing the shrimp. So traditional shrimp farming relies on getting rid of this water, like I used to do when I was 9 years old. But in the case, I used to drop the water into the toilet and then open the tap. In the case of traditional shrimp farming, both the toilet and the tap is the same, is the oceans. And on the way out, the problem is ecological because they are dumping antibiotics, organic matter, sometimes pesticides. And on the way in, the problem is sanitary because there's shrimp, they live in a never-ending pandemic because there's no way that farmers can get rid of disease. So we don't do any water discharge. We have this microbial community that is constantly recycling the nitrogen, and sometimes we get, as a byproduct, we get a sludge of that biofloc. We collect that sludge, and then we feed that to a biodigester, and that biodigester creates methane, basically, that we burn it, and we heat the water that will go to the shrimp, and also we create bile, that is an organic fertilizer that is nutrition both for the plant and the soil. So in Oaxaca, we have a demo farm for regenerative demo farm, and our goal is that everywhere we have Shrimpbox's farms, it's a force for good because it can provide fertilization and it can lead a regenerative approach to a food system, right? We want this to be an example and an inspiration, and we want people to get involved. In all of our videos, we say the same. You want to get involved? Please, we cannot do this alone. So yes, that's our regenerative approach, and yeah, I did have the last. So, and now what we were able to do is, so our farm is basically inside a warehouse that we found, a very nice warehouse that we found in Indy. But now we have also a shrimp box that goes outside. We call it Elsa because we started it in the middle of the winter, and we were able to grow shrimp, tropical shrimp, outside the warehouse, basically using insulation, and we can grow tropical shrimp in the middle of the Midwest winter. So, and yeah, so our goal, I think it's very important. Our business model, we want to empower a new generation of shrimp farmers. So it's basically like contract farming, right? But also like a franchise because we allow our farmers to go and get their own market if they are capable of. And yeah, so, and we are very happy to do it in the Midwest. We decided to do it in Indianapolis because, well, the government made a very good case for us choosing the state, but being in the Midwest without any access to ocean water was a very strong signal, a very strong proof that we can do it anywhere in the world, right? So right now we are in conversations with people in the Middle East, in Japan, and different parts of the United States, but we want the Midwest to be our stronghold for this new version of shrimp farming. Thank you.
How about that? So that's one form of a history, of a geography lesson. Brian, what do you do, first of all, and tell us how you think about kind of meat production from Missouri and beyond and right back to Missouri?
So I have to front load this with, when Chris called me, it was a number I didn't recognize and I almost didn't answer. But he said, you know, here's your opportunity to speak to the geography group. And I said, you do know you're talking to a meat scientist, right? Yes, this is good. All right, so just real quick, I'm a native of Missouri. I left for 20 years, came back. My original background is in quantitative genetics, and then I went to Iowa State and got a PhD in meat science and muscle biology. And my grandmother never understood what I did for a living. So I would just tell her I just wake up every day trying to make a better hot dog. That's not exactly true. I am heavily invested, have a family that's heavily invested in diversified farming, both from a traditional, conventional standpoint, but I really like to think in the forward thinking. My crystal ball is cloudy most days, but I think some of the things that I'll maybe present to you is just a very different lens to animal ag. I really appreciate being on the stage with animal ag today. And I was just waiting for that title slide to pop up so I can advance to the next. There we are. So here's the obligatory. There's going to be a lot of people on the globe in a very short period of time. What we have learned over the history of humankind, a number of things as I think about this from producing protein for humans. Global meat consumption is on a very large scale. If we think about just some historical perspective, we've certainly had populations within civilizations that choose not to use animal products, but one of the things we know to be true, that as humans become more affluent and they have more disposable income, they tend to add more and higher quality animal products to their diet to a certain extent. And we can look at some of the trends over time, and it really doesn't matter. A lot of this is cultural or religious based, and depending on if you're going to eat beef or pork or lamb or goat or shrimp, for that matter. I'm a big fan of the surf and like to raise the turf here in the home state of Missouri. Some things to think about as we look at the theme today. I think about container farming and urban agriculture and growing things inside, and I think that is I'm all in. What's interesting to me in animal agriculture, as we consider moving the animals inside and growing them in efficient systems, there's often a disconnect, and there's a societal push that says maybe we shouldn't do that, which I think is an interesting thing to think about. So when I think about animal ag, and this is where Chris and I, on the very short phone call that I'm in my car, I said I want you to think about something. Why do we grow livestock where we grow them, and then what are the implications going forward? Will we continue to grow livestock in those places? And we'll talk specifically about beef, since Missouri is a huge contributor to beef production in this country and globally when we think about exports. So we talk about where are the people. We know where the people are. They're the red spots are where the major contributions of population centers are. And as we leave Kansas City, Missouri, going west, we have seen historically we moved beef production towards the western states. Part of that is we raised cattle where there weren't people. And when we think about animal ag, we have seen this trend over my lifetime that we tend to move livestock away from people for a number of reasons. The beef specific piece, though, I think is very interesting to consider. I like to think of cattle as recyclers of sunshine and water. All right, sunshine grows the grass. The cattle, as a ruminant animal, can utilize forage that humans usually don't eat or won't eat, and they become good recyclers of this grass-based growth out into from the Midwest. And then as we moved to the western states, there were a number of reasons we did this. And this has some pretty significant implications for the future, I think. The humidity is much lower as we go into Kansas and Nebraska and eastern Colorado. The health of animals with lower humidity is a lot. I mean, if you think about it today, we walk outside, the humidity is high, it's uncomfortable. We talk about growing livestock in feedlots, for example. Some of those health considerations were, let's move the cattle to the west. All right, there it's away from people. We have big expanses of land. We can do this. One of the interesting things that happened, though, we grow the corn that we typically feed feedlot cattle. We were growing the corn in the Corn Belt, and we're sitting right in the middle of it, right? So what happened is, as the cattle moved to the west, we realized that trucking corn to the west was a problem, at least from a cost standpoint. So what did? We moved the corn production to those arid climates. And what happened when we moved those? We needed water. So we set up, lower left picture, center pivot irrigation. If you fly over the Midwest and the high plains, you see those circles from the airplane, and those are center pivot irrigation footprints. So we're growing corn out there, we have the cattle there, and that becomes a little bit of a problem for us, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But where are the cows? Okay, when I say where are the cows, where are the mothers of the calves that are born for beef production? And we in Missouri are either the number 2 or number 3 cow-calf producing state in this country. Texas will always be number 1 because they're so dang big. A lot of cattle in Texas. But Missouri and Oklahoma flip-flop for the other, those 2 other spots in the top 3. So we grow a lot of cows in small herds in this state. One of the unique things that happens, though, if we go to this one, where do the cattle end up? Or if we take total cattle inventory, we see a shift to the west. So those calves that are born in this state will find a home. The end of their production cycle usually is somewhere in a feedlot in the high plains. And notice California. California still has a very strong hold in the cattle industry. This also includes dairy cattle. California is still number 1 producer of dairy cows in the United States. A lot of people believe it's Wisconsin, but in fact it is not. So we've moved a whole industry over the last 40 years. Where are the cows in Missouri? All right, we do have some really interesting, if we think about where the glacier stopped, we have a lot of land in north central Missouri, but north of the Missouri River, highly fertile land. The glacier and peeled off, and we have a pretty good dump of topsoil up there. You'll notice that we don't have as many cows in North Missouri as we do Southwest Missouri. The Ozark region is much more conducive to raising cows and grass rather than raising row crops. So we have a really large concentration of cattle production in that part of the state. Where do we grow the corn? Well, we still grow the corn heavily in Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Ohio Valley. But if you look out there towards the west, there are some really big green squares in places like Kansas and Nebraska, and that's what's sitting under center pivot irrigation. The problem, well, not yet. There is a problem coming. If we think about farming practices, we think about erosion. What does that erosion look like? One of the big trends, we have taken a lot of grazing land out of production in this country. And I think that will continue. We've seen it incentivized by corn and soybean farming. It has been fairly productive and profitable in recent decades. So we have plowed a lot of land that we may not. It's highly erodible in many cases if we look at what our Farm Service Agency provides us in that case. So we're not grazing as many acres as we once were. We're farming those with corn and soybean production. But one of the trends that we're seeing, how many of you in the room would say you eat beef once a week, at least? Okay. How many of you think it's still too damned expensive? Okay. We have a really interesting storm that is coming in the beef industry. All right, look at the trend lines here. This is 1981 to today in the beef cattle inventory in this country. So the number of female cattle in production has declined pretty much. If we wanted, we could draw a pretty straight line through that decline, right? And so we have the smallest number of female cows in this country, but we are still producing more beef than we ever have from a tonnage standpoint. All right, you say, well, is that efficiency? It's partly efficiency. We're growing those animals to a larger size in the same period of time. We've selected them for genetic merit. The top line is beef carcass weight. Probably not something you think about every day of the week, but I do. Okay? In 1980, the average beef carcass weighed 650 pounds. That's both sides hanging on the rail. As we approach 2025, look at that increase. 866, if we look at USDA's data from Friday, last week, 866-pound carcass. Somebody said something about bison. There's the bison trend line. We started collecting that data as well. So what we're seeing is a decline in numbers, but an increase in the total size of the animal. So it doesn't take as many animals to make this huge increase in beef. Here's where we run into a problem. And if you spend any time talking to people in the beef industry, the question becomes, what about water? All right, we went to the West because the cattle perform there better. Their respiratory health is better because there's not as much humidity and the heat doesn't work on them as much. But then we end up with depleted water. And if we look at the aquifers that sit under the states where we raise beef cattle, we see a big decline from 1900, and this is out to 08, but the decline is real and it's continued. So then the question is, what do we do if we want to continue to have beef production in this country? What does the model look like? And there are going to be some challenges, and some of these challenges are really grand because they get at the social piece of our how we perceive animal agriculture. And this is a picture from the Iowa Cattlemen's Association, and one of the big pushes that we've seen is, can we mitigate heat stress? Can we mitigate a humid climate like we have in Missouri? Can we bring production and finishing of cattle and other species? We already do that a lot. Poultry and pork production are heavily produced in integrated systems. But can we do this with cattle as well? Is it enough to put shade over them? Can we tunnel ventilate the building? Can we move the air? All these kinds of things, and grow them in a system like you see on the screen. The short answer is yes. But the pushback that we get is, well, I don't know if I want to see those animals growing in those highly confined systems. I don't maybe understand that. What about the health of the animal? What about the welfare of the animal? Those are all real concerns. And we work, in my life now, we work in this very heavily to try to find the optimization. I don't think we need to maximize either end of this equation. We have some interesting things that have happened in making animal protein and alternative proteins for human consumption. I got a call in 2019 that said, would you please come and give the fake meat talk? I said, sure. What are we talking about? You know, the plant-based and the bioreactor-grown meat. And all. So I did my homework. You would probably think, well, a meat scientist is probably going to advocate for his industry. He probably doesn't want to go give that talk. I've given that talk 27 times in public now, and I'm happy to have the conversation because I think about providing protein for people, right? Said that right off the top. Whether it's plant-based or animal-based, protein is important to the be-all, end-all of our nutritive existence, right? So we have some challenges that I think are very interesting, and here's the cartoon version of how we have laboratory-grown meat. This still requires a bovine cell to grow beef. And it is in a system with a bioreactor and it's continuous flow, and we can harvest those cells. We can stretch them and grow them on a scaffold. They can look like meat. They could have a texture like meat. And someday, if demand requires it, we will make it cheap enough that it can be competitive. And a lot of people tell me, no, Brian, you were wrong on that. I said, the phone in my pocket can run the same amount of big data that when I was at Auburn University in 1997, I had to use a mainframe for, that took up an entire room. So if we want it to get there, it will get there if the demand says that that's what should happen. So there are a lot of unknowns here. Kathy mentioned 3D printing chicken. Yep, that can happen, right? But at what cost, and what are we willing to pay for that, right? There is a cost. This is a shot of a bioreactor. This is a continuous flow protein bioreactor for making meat. I would argue that if you look in that room right now, there's an incredible cost to the front end of this, and we still have some other things to think about. The health of those cells and growing those cultures and so Daniel talks about antibiotics and shrimping and things like this. We're talking about a living system here. So it's some of the similar concerns that we have in the animal model as well, from a living cell system. Well, the plant-based, I need to talk about this real quick. If we think about comparing alternative protein systems to what we do now, there's a lot of work that's come out, and it's hard to get a hold of this. A lot of it's qualitative and figuring out, you have to back into the data. But if we compare beef production to plant-based protein production, there are a couple outcomes if you dig in the literature. Reduced energy carbon footprint compared to beef production. So that's plant proteins versus beef. Similar energy and carbon footprint for poultry and pork production in this country. Largely vertically integrated, right? A small footprint, highly efficient. But somebody earlier today made the comment about food waste, and I thought the interesting outcome of this particular paper was we could get greater gains in cost by reducing food waste and growing and eating insects. So I think there are other ways to get where we need to go sometimes in the protein conversation. The plant-based proteins, I think, are a very viable place to be. COVID did show us one thing, though. In this country, the plant-based protein demand for those during COVID tanked. And I don't know exactly why, but a lot of people pulled back kind of to maybe their roots. And we sold a lot of deep freezers. And every small and very small local meat processor in the Midwest and around this country was booked into infinity to process animals. So it wasn't that we had a protein shortage, we had a processing and distribution problem in this country. So when we scale things up, we know that's going to happen when we have a very small number of entities producing the large piece of the protein puzzle. So I think the plant-based piece at some level is here to stay in terms of protein production. Make no mistake, it is this point, this isn't about making cheap protein. This is about being competitive in the meat space. When the Impossible Burger rolled out, it was $1 greater at retail at Burger King than the Whopper. It has since had to retract in price to be competitive. So in summary, these are the four things that I kind of think about with regard to the beef conversation. There is a very strong global demand for animal protein, especially beef. It has, at some level, an inelastic demand. Consumers will buy it almost at any price, almost. Water availability for animal production, especially beef production in this country, will challenge us. I live every day with the social pressure for the kinds of production systems that we have in play and that we may move to going forward. And I really do think that the alternative proteins will probably continue to shift the marketplace. But at the end of the day, if we go back to the very first slide, we're going to have to feed an awful lot of people, and I think it's all hands on deck to get that done, regardless of the system.
Fantastic. Thank you. So selfishly, I have a few questions I'd like to ask.
I'm in.
But I would also encourage everybody, put your thinking caps on. I know it always takes a second to marshal your thoughts. But I'd love to take a few questions from the audience. So I was really inspired by the Chancellor's opening remarks about, kind of the origins of food, right? Beef cattle did not start in America. Shrimp did not start in, Japan or, wherever we associate these things with, right? The geography of our food is maybe not necessarily an outcome of a bunch of deliberate acts, right? But humans made many choices over time that left us with this food landscape. You've talked a little about it from both your perspectives. You're an entrepreneur that's making deliberate choices right now or giving us new choices that we can opt into. So maybe just from your own worldview, but other things you've observed, how do you see choices over the next 30 years as it relates to, I guess I'll call it protein or meat-ish based protein. What do you see those choices looking like, or the trends that might shape them? And how do you see that changing the geography of kind of protein production. And you can just talk about shrimp all day long or whatever you want. No holds barred. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
So our farming VP, our VP of Farming Operations, he comes from the cattle industry. He used to be managing 110,000 feeding a feedlot, right? So I have some understanding of that business as well. And I don't know. So it's very similar, right? So the challenges are very similar. We are basically looking at the same world. I don't know. I think that the most important pressure we have pressures from everywhere, right? So in terms of the availability of feed. So I'm also paying attention about what's happening with the grains. I also need to pay attention about what's happening with the bulk of anchovites and sardines, because that's what we need in order for our feed. Now we are looking into the question is how can we make a disconnection from the ocean so that we can have fish meal analogs, right? And in a way, and we're looking also at what's happening in the insect farming. In a way, insects and shrimp are arthropods, or they're cousins. The economies of scale are very similar. But on the other side, we have the demand, and I think that this is the part that is more confusing, because I think that on the one hand, we have these narrative, or we have these kind of fashions about people at least in social media, right? They are very talking a lot about the alternative protein, but then on the market side, so the demand is it's really not there, right? So or not at the growth that we expected it to be. So I think that part is very confusing. I don't know. I can tell you what I hope it could be, and I think that what I hope is that we can shift from what hasn't worked in the past, which is basically concentrated food systems. So big companies making stuff in the back office, right, without us knowing what's there, how our food is raised or grown or manufactured. And I would like to see more transparency, and I would like to use better tools. So I think that, and I also had a conversation with ChatGPT about this, about how biology is doing chemistry as compared to how humans we do chemistry, because biology works in chemistry in 3 dimensions, right? And it's very specific, and it can create anything that we don't know. And we mostly don't know how it does it. We can replicate some stuff. So and we have learned a lot through that, because we use microbial communities that is basically changing the water chemistry of our tanks. But also, but that's the same thing that is happening in the soil. So in a way, I think that the future is basically going a little bit backwards. In Mexico, we have the milpa, which is basically a poly culture of different stuff, right? So I think that we can learn more about that, and I don't know. I would like just to see less, secret sauces of chemicals, more transparency, more natural ingredients. And I think that if we consider the demand of the Generation Z, I think that they are about to become the most important consumer in the market, right? So, like, what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking about the narratives and the values that they have, and we are trying to convey and to meet those values.
Great. Brian.
So I really appreciate the almost going backwards conversation, right? So at some point, it's consumers do want to know, to a certain degree, where their food comes from, right? There is a group of consumers that just don't, right? They don't tell me. I'm still getting. I want bacon. Don't tell me. And that's there. So we need to understand that. But I think this. There's somewhere in the middle that we can land, and we've gone way far out into, and this is not I'm not an economist. I don't even pretend to be an economist, but in this country, we have a lot of policy, cheap food policy, right? Price-based, cheap food policy. And if you travel in a lot of other places on this globe, food is valued more, just in terms of the disposable income. And I think if we can get a shift to where we're this generation that's becoming the most important consumer, and they're going to use their dollar to tell us what to do, we're starting to see that food is valued to a greater degree. And it isn't necessarily the cheapest calories that we can find, and we're going to stock it up in this. It's more about why we're doing it. It's more of our social fabric. I'm raising 3 children. I have 2 in college and 1 still in high school, and we still try to have everybody at the table to eat and discuss our life, right? And part of this is thinking more about the quality of the food that's being consumed and taking that, it may be less, right? We may be consuming less. I'm a filet mignon guy versus a great big sirloin, but it's either way. I like the quality of the steak cut on the filet, but I value that and I'll consume it, and there's not as much waste. So it's this middle ground of maybe being tied to a system that isn't ultimately efficient, but is it efficient enough that we land somewhere in the middle. And I think going forward, we're going to see that. And these consumers, this generation of consumers is probably going to force us there, I think.
One more selfish question. So I'm kind of a population guy, as some people may have referenced earlier, and population's looking to grow. The GOTUS's comments earlier, I think, kind of made you think, right? Yeah, population is going to grow, but that's not necessarily the reason there's not going to be enough food, right? Or why people will go without food. So what are the trends that will kind of change the geography of, I don't know, whether it's supply chains or whatever? I mean, what you're talking about potentially 5-10 years from now is like a shrimp container in every neighborhood in every town, right? And who knows, we could literally, shrimp could be the thing everybody eats around the globe constantly, and it's got a completely different geographic footprint, right? But then you think about, steak, it's such a kind of a cultural thing, right? There are certain countries, America is a beef country, well, so is Argentina, so is Brazil, but there's a lot of countries that aren't, right? So how do you see, kind of the shift in the supply chains to meet that growing population in places, Africa could double its population just in the next handful of decades, while Europe and America, decline, and China just lost 600,000 people last year, right? So how do you see that positioning for that changing humanity?
I think that only by internalizing the impact of these shifts, because if we keep just outsourcing the impact of the things that we're doing, then what we're doing is just approaching doomsday with blindfolded, right? We're just not looking at things. And I think that I read your book, so you talk a lot about the capacity of the system to hold certain biomass, right? So I think that basically internalizing those ecological and, but not also ecological, but also from the point of view, for instance, of labor, right? Because there's places, I was talking in the morning with somebody from Saudi Arabia, and he's so he wants to take shrimp box there, but he's questioning about what's the labor input there. So there's going to be places where if you don't have enough labor, so you cannot have probably enough food locally grown that is labor intensive. You might need to outsource it. But what happens when there is no country in the world that wants to do that industry? So I think that the only sensible thing to do is to think about systems that can hold the impact of everything they're doing.
Ryan?
So I think about this maybe from if we look at the very fast-growing populations, if we just pull Africa back for a minute, but just think about India and China. And if we look at where the protein production is, it's in the smaller animals with a shorter gestation, higher litter size, if you will. The protein can get to market faster. So it's pork and poultry, and that's, I mean, the two big pieces that are growing there.
They're growing more and more in your chart.
Absolutely, and you'll see that kind of open up a little bit. I had a colleague at the University of Missouri that's been retired for a number of years, but I remember him telling a class that we should be fully prepared to eat more rodents and eat more insects and eat more, my students were appalled. And he said, but think about it. I mean, you talk about if you need rapid protein production, what kind of system can you create for that to occur? And it's about changing mindset. Because at the end of the day, if you're really, really hungry, you might be surprised what you're willing to take as part of your diet if it sustains you. So it's a different lens, maybe.
We can't end with eating rodents and insects. so let's go to the audience. I gave you guys a cue earlier. Anybody have a hand up that wants to ask a question? Yes, sir.
Chris, I have a question for Daniel. What do you think is the biggest barrier to there being more of your shrimp farms, right, of your tanks in the U.S.? What's the limiting factor right now? Because I can't assume it's interest, because I'm very interested in having one in my backyard.
Well, right now it's manufacturing capabilities, which we are working to solve. And after that, it's basically, so we're creating a new industry. So there are many moving parts. So it's talking to chefs, talking to consumers. I think that the way that we can really make an impact is breaking through the technology and agricultural aspect and going to the culinary and the cultural aspect of this. Because in the end, what we want, and this is why we start with this, about our relationship with food, what we strive for is that the people, the more that they know about our shrimp, the more they like it, the more they are engaged with that. So we have to also work with that. Farmers, they are paying attention, they like what they see. Now we need to be sure that we have everything really, all our everything in line, so that we so that they can trust us, right? So that they can be shrimp farmers and that they are successful. So all of this it's a huge challenge, but I think that we have a good path for solving that.
Great. Next question. No. Admiral.
Going back to the plant-based alternative discussion, I think it was Impossible Burger that came out pretty successfully. And if I recall, at that time the market was competing for the best, like, vegan alternative, right? So everybody was looking at it through that lens of, hey, I want to be the top competitor in this plant-based. They came at it and said, no, we want to be the best burger.
Right.
Right. We're going to look at this market differently. Are you aware of other manufacturers thinking about the meat market more broadly and offering that sort of alternative that's plant-based?
So there are a lot of players in the space right now that we don't know a lot about. I think one of the challenges, so the Impossible Burger was a really interesting approach to the market because they jumped right into the fast serve, and they ended up in a low price point, well, a relatively low price point compared to, say, a bigger chain. One of the challenges, though, is in order to chase the flavor profiles and the texture profiles and these things, the original Impossible Burger had 19 ingredients. And there's a lot of things that were probably not thought about in that context, because there's some consumers that are like, yeah, I mean, I would eat that. It has 19 ingredients on the label and I can't pronounce 13 of them, right? And if you look at a ground beef patty, it has one ingredient, right? So I think there were some things that challenge that market a little bit right now. And so I don't know, it appears that a lot of them are still chasing kind of that same space. And you know how this works. If you're the first, second, or third there and you do it well, there's no room for anybody else for a while. But all of a sudden the demand, you mentioned it, the demand has been pulled way back. And something I didn't think about, but I had a student bring this up to me recently. And I'll just tell you what she said. She says, Dr. Wiegand, I'm kind of pissed. Why is that? They're trying to mimic something that I choose not to eat. Why would I buy it? And that was lost on me for a long time, but then I stood there kind of in stunned silence, which I'm never silent. And I said, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way.
I might choose it over a rat.
Over a rat? Yeah. So if we employ some good genetic selection, you might like the rat we come up with.
At the risk of getting the gong, I'm going to take one last question. Go ahead.
Just a quick one. You mentioned how many acres it would take to replace the supply of shrimp. Did you say 8 or 8?
80 acres for 2.8 million that I found out in Wikipedia.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Let's please give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Chris, Daniel, and Brian. Geospatial education, especially when it concerns agriculture, must begin in the schools. We're very lucky today to have a nationally recognized specialist in this area, and she happens to be based here in St. Louis at the renowned Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. It's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Sandra Arango-Caro, who's going to fill us in on Cultivating the Future, a culturally diverse geospatial education program in STEM and Ag. Sandra?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm too short to be behind the podium, so I'm gonna try this for the first time. I'm a graduate from UMSL, my PhD from the Ecology, Evolution, and Systematic program. So I'm very happy to be back. Never thought to be in this side of the room. So today, I'm very excited to tell you the first steps in a geospatial education program we are developing at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center with the support of Boeing and with a very special community. And then we hope with time we can expand this program to other communities. So the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center is the largest nonprofit research center in the world that is dedicated to improve the human condition through plant science. And it has an education research, an outreach lab, and we work to inspire the next generation of STEM and agricultural scientists. So we work in developing curriculum that is tied to the research we do at the Danforth. We also offer professional development, and we provide all the equipment and supplies that the educators need for informal and formal settings for free. And we conduct education research that we will tell you a little bit in a moment. So currently, the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center has a partnership with the Jackie Joyner Kersey Foundation, Lansdowne Up, and the University of Illinois Extension. And we have created what is called the Jackie Joyner Kersey Foundation, Jackie Joyner Kersey Food, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Innovation Center. So the Danforth is conducting a couple of activities to start developing our geospatial program at the Jackie Joyner Kersey Center. So I'm gonna use the acronym JJK for that, where the students are being, where the students go. So the JJK Center has students from a very underserved community. The JJK is based in East St. Louis, which is across from the Mississippi River from downtown St. Louis in the state of Illinois. And this community is very underserved, historically excluded. The majority of the population are African American, and then they are really facing a lot of challenges. They have very poor school systems. They face a lot of pollution problems, and well, that's why we want to work with these communities to offer them programming in STEM Ag. So this particular geospatial program that we are designing has the following objectives. We want to create a geospatial curriculum that covers concepts of basic geography and introduce the students to geospatial technologies, but that is also culturally relevant because we want the students to link geography and geospatial to the realities that are experiencing in their neighborhoods. And also that is tied to food security. San Luis is considered a food desert, and we want to make sure the students are aware of, food production, nutrition, food access, and so on. And lastly, of course, we want them to get excited about STEM and agriculture, and to consider in the future to join STEM careers. So the first, I'm going to tell you about 3 components. The first one is a geography curriculum that we just implemented in May with middle and high school students through 6 sessions of each of 1 hour. And this is during the after-school program. And it's about what is a map, what a map has. What are the importance of maps? What are the applications of the information in maps? And for this, I want to acknowledge Zach Stafford, that is somewhere here, one of our instructors there, as well as Ash Cass, who is our curriculum development expert. So we work on this curriculum, Zach worked with the kids, and let's see, the first thing we asked them was to draw a map of their neighborhood. Oh, this is not, the animations don't work? Ooh, how can I go back? Because, I have animations here. Is it possible? Anyway, this is one of our fancy maps. No? Well, the previous photos show another version of this map that didn't have any legends, anything. It was just the drawing that was, so the students at the beginning draw maps of their neighborhood, and then through the 6 sessions, we show them different maps that go from the global to the local scale. Yay, here, it's working. So this is an original map before we started the activity. Next. Yay. So here they explore mapping at the global scale. Next. Next. Until we get to our region. Next. So here we have Zach, who is introducing the students to mapping of the neighborhood, and actually there is a project to revitalize the area. Next one. And here they are examining historical photos of the Jones Water Park that is adjacent to the JJK. So then the students are making a connection between, maps, but their own reality. And after the activity, we ask them to make maps again of their neighborhood, and you can see that they have added some of these components that maps should have, legends and so on. Thank you, Nicole. So the second element is going to be a summer camp in the last week of July, and we are going to have the students to cover geography concepts. Again, we may have new students that were not in the after-school program. They are going to be introduced to geospatial technologies. They, of course, are going to have a link to applications to agriculture. They are going to be doing some mapping. And the last day is going to be a field trip to the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center field site. So they are going to have first exposure to farming, to technology, to geospatial, and to research being conducted at the Danforth. The third element is a program for internships. We're going to have 3 high schoolers. Here we have one of our JJK interns from last year that was hosted at the Danforth Center. So I will update this photo with the ones we will get in July. The students are going to be drone certified. They are going to be supporting the different summer camps. And then they are going to create a map of food security of their neighborhood. So also, we are going to do education research. We are assessing changes in the students before and after these activities to examine student perceptions in STEC subjects. I like the acronym STEC, and also their interest in STEC careers. And we will ask surveys related to their experience in extracurriculum activities. So I just want to acknowledge all the people that have been involved in putting together these first components of the program. We will repeat these programs the following years, and then we will expand into other schools. And I will be happy to answer any questions and to discuss maybe with you your potential future collaboration with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Tomorrow, Dr. Arango-Caro will meet with the teachers from the area who are going to be attending a special workshop developed by UMSL and AGS, where she's going to give this presentation again in the hope that local school districts will be interested in utilizing geospatial education with reference to STEM and ag. Thank you very much. And now we have our last major panel of the day. AGS President Dr. Marie Price has organized a group to focus on building the next generation of mappers through Youth Mappers and North Star of GIS. Marie?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very excited about this panel. One of the things that we know is so important is about building the mappers. You know, what will our future workforce look like, and how do we provide opportunities, not just in the US context, but in other parts of the world, to train people in exciting advances in geospatial technology. So I think we've put together a fantastic panel today. First of all, we have Clinton Johnson. He has the title of Racial Equity and Social Justice Solutions Lead at Esri. Welcome, Clinton. He's going to talk about his work with a nonprofit he started called North Star of GIS. It was recently recognized as yesterday by National Geographic Society. He won a Wayfinder Award, and you'll get to. And I also have the privilege of working with Clinton on the AGS Council. And next to Clinton, we have Zola Manyugwa. She comes to us from the University of West Virginia, but before that, she was a geography teacher in Malawi. She is finishing up her master's degree and has been active as a Youth Mappers ambassador. And she will begin the discussion of Youth Mappers, which has been a very innovative program to introduce mapping skills and open source frameworks around the world. And our third speaker is Adele Birkenes. She is at the USAID Geo Center. If you're going to help people develop, you also got to know where you're doing it and how and measure your success at it. The Geo Center has been a fundamental aspect of improving USAID's work. And Adele also has the special feature of starting out at her college in Poughkeepsie, Vassar, where she started a Youth Mappers chapter. That led to eventually her working at USAID, and now, lucky me, she gets to be a graduate student at my university next fall. So I am thrilled to have them speak. They're each going to talk about 15 minutes. If you want to know more about Youth Mappers, there's a QR code in the bottom of your program here with a fantastic video about the organization. Take it away, Clinton. You can.
Thanks, Marie. Hello, everyone. I'm Clinton Johnson. I use he, him pronouns. And before I dive into my presentation, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is the first day of Pride. And people all around, that's good, that's fine. People all around the world are celebrating that history, the contributions of people from LGBTQIA+ communities, and the resilience of people who identify. And as we do our work and as we continue to the close of the event, I just want us to be thinking about how we can bring that same spirit of equality and more than acceptance, but embracing of diversity of experiences and perspectives into our work. While I don't have a story map to show you all, I also have QR codes that'll be on my slides. You'll have time, the same QR code will keep popping up. It has a set of links to content about the North Star of GIS. There'll be a link to a great Pride story map. And there's also a link to a survey that I would love for you all to participate in. There isn't a whole lot of data about what Black representation and experience in the geography-related fields looks like. And we're trying to grow that. And with your input, we'll have much more information. So, as Marie said, I have the sort of privilege and honor of standing before you today as a newly minted National Geographic Explorer. And I also have the privilege of being the first and right now the only person at Esri with equity in my official title. And hopefully there will be much more of that. We'll see much more of that. And I think all of those honors, those acknowledgments they're definitely not just about me. I work with lots of people doing lots of great things, and I'll talk about a little bit of that, but they all sort of mark milestones towards a future where the geography community is truly equitable and where everyone finds belonging. We're here in St. Louis, a city that is 44% Black, and so when we think about diversity, I want you all to sort of shift towards equitable representation. And equitable representation, diversity might mean a few people here are Black, a few people here are Latinx, and so on. Equitable representation would mean that 44% of the people who are here are Black, because that's what we see in the region. That includes people who have lived here for many generations, people who just moved here, people from out of the country. So as we think about diversity, I want you all to sort of shift to equity. And as you think about inclusion, I also want you to shift towards belonging. Now, inclusion is more like this notion where we have this exclusive club, we call it geography, and we decide who we let in. And we think it's good to let in some other people who we might otherwise exclude. Well, the notion of belonging is that we equitably co-create spaces where we recognize that people of all backgrounds belong. And we embrace them when they show up, and we make them feel welcome. And I don't have to convince you all that geography matters. Obviously, that's why we're all here. In fact, raise your hand if you think that geography and GIS and geospatial have the power to create a more equitable future. Of course. Now, again, it's really powerful. I don't have to convince you of that. We're dealing with maps and spatial analysis to address many kinds of issues, and always with the best of what's important to us, what's important to the country in mind. And today, that's largely about creating things that we talk about as progress. In the past, things that we talked about as progress would have meant redlining, making it so that some people were relegated to communities that might do them harm, while other people were situated in communities that would benefit them. And resources that would benefit folks would go in some communities, and things that would burden folks would go in other communities. Back in the day, people were really clear on what they wanted to accomplish as it related to race and racism. Today, sometimes we just say progress, and I would encourage you all to think that progress must be equitable and that it isn't something that you do on the side or you do after. Raise your hand if you have had the opportunity or where you actually have used geography, geospatial, or GIS to make the world more equitable, even in some small way. Some project that you've worked on, raise your hand if you've actually done that. That's a lot less hands than the hands of people who really believe that these tools, these concepts, these ways of thinking about the world can help, not just help in some general sense, but to make the world more equitable. Unfortunately, as it relates to inclusion or exclusion in STEM, there's several challenges. So 44% of Black people who graduated high school and entered into the STEM field say that they've had some really positive experiences. And despite the folks who've had very positive experiences, there are also those who've had negative experiences. They felt like people were treating them as if they didn't understand the subject matter. People were treating them as if they didn't belong. They had repeated encounters with racial slurs and other harmful interactions. You'll also, if you follow that link and you fill out the survey, you'll also see a link to this data. You don't have to fill out the survey to get the data, but you should fill out the survey. And mentorship matters. Raise your hand if you had a mentor who encouraged you to pursue the work that you do in geography or in agriculture. Keep your hand up if that mentor shared your racial identity. Keep your hand up if that mentor also shared your gender. So for some of us, it sort of just happens, and that representation matters. We can see ourselves in a future where we can have a positive impact or we can enjoy our career. And for others, because of this lack of representation, we have a different experience, but mentorship matters. Over half of Black people who had Black teachers, Black people in STEM, they said that they had a Black teacher that made them feel excited about pursuing a career in STEM, who helped them to imagine themselves into the future and encourage them to keep studying. So mentorship matters, and so we need to make sure that each and every one of us can be a mentor, but we also want to make sure that there are more and more opportunities for people from underrepresented groups to connect with mentors who look like them, who may have shared some experiences that they've had. So representation matters, and as I said, and I'm sure you're all excited to help out with this problem by filling out that survey, but there's not a whole lot of data about this, right? So Dee Jordan has been working to collect some information about this. Organizations like AGI have been working to collect some information about this to some degree. There's an organization that's kind of like North Star of GIS, but it's focused in the UK, focused on geography, PhD students, and they've collected some data, what it means to be Black or of mixed Black race. All these things differ from one place to the next. And we've started to, like I said, collect some information. The city of Philadelphia, where I used to work on the enterprise GIS team in the city of Philadelphia, and today they've got 2 Black GIS employees out of 28 employees. And some people might say, well, 2 out of 28, maybe that's more than 28's not that big of a team, and 2 out of 28, maybe that's pretty good. Again, the city of Philadelphia is about like St. Louis, it's about 40% Black. The other thing to note is when I started on the enterprise GIS team, probably when it was just a little bit bigger than its smallest size, there were 2 Black people, right? And that was when it was 4 and 5 people on the team. And it's still just 2 Black people. And most of those people are not people who are from Philadelphia. So North Star exists to engage our community. And we talk about our community as the melanated and mapping community. And it's important that we speak directly to the experiences of of people from underrepresented groups. And in this context, we're talking about Black people. So we engage Black geo students, educators, entrepreneurs, and professionals, but we also engage our allies in this work. We engage at events like the Esri user conferences and EURISA events. We want to do some more things at AGS events, and we create Black at Geo event experiences that bring Black experiences in those spaces to the center, and make things possible, like literal investments in Black-owned businesses while we're at conference venues. Would have been great if we had an experience at Kathy's Kitchen, maybe, as a for instance, as a way of literally investing while we're here. We connect Black students at HBCUs to opportunities to pursue those geospatial courses that they're interested in. In some ways, one of those ways is that we funnel cash grants to them, and we do 11 cash grants a year of $5,000. But we also connect them with opportunities to attend workshops and to participate in organizations like AAG and EURISA. We convene our community at our own events. We host an annual event for Black History Month, and we also host an event annually that we call the Homecoming. And this year, Homecoming is moving to Geography Awareness Week. We want to take up space in that moment where very often, great things are happening, exciting experiences in geography, and not a whole lot of Black people on stages, not a whole lot of awareness of contributions of Black geographers. And so we want to take up a lot of space intentionally there. And we advocate. So we engage with organizations like AGS and Esri and so many others to really advocate for Black representation and belonging. And we never work alone. One of the things that we found out really early on is that there were several moments in the past 30 years where people have tried to do something similar, and it's always been about one or two people who were in the right position, in the right organization, and while they were there, and while they had the energy, they were making things happen. They were doing things that in the moment would increase Black representation in a space. Well, we knew we needed to build something that was more sustainable, so we put a team of people together. So there's folks who work in and outside of Esri. There are a lot of entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs in geospace who want to see more people who look like them competing for work and collaborating for work. There's organizations like Black Tech Link, which engages the local community in San Diego. There's Mapping Black California, that will soon be Mapping Black, and they bring geospatial into journalism. There's African Women in GIS, there's Black Girls Map, and the organization I want to talk about today is really quickly is Trouble & Co., and they teach students who are in high school, they teach them GIS. And just like many programs, you learn all the fundamental skills that you might imagine you'd want to learn. You learn about topics like health and the economy and food, but you learn about them through the lens of equity. So while you are working in the food space and learning how to make a map and build a survey and create a dashboard, you're simultaneously learning how you use GIS to advance equity. That work is really important. They're looking to start an initiative in the St. Louis area, so definitely look out for them, and you'll find a link to them after you fill out that survey. So take our survey. Do I have to get it next? Yeah. And join us at some of these events that we engage in. So if you're going to be at the Esri UC, join us at the Black at Esri UC experience. Join us at Black at EURISA at the GIS Pro event. We'll probably do it at some of the regional events. Join us for Homecoming Week. Partner with us. Maybe you want to share some content in one of our venues. Introduce people to your great programming, your great work. Share some of your work and your resources with our audience, and it could be really helpful, and you'll get to know another side of the geography community. Connect with us on Melanated and Mapping. At Melanet, well, after you fill out the survey, you'll get that link too. And it's, again, it's just it's an online safer space for real conversations and some educational resources to help you in your own work to advance equity. Raise your hand if you've been a part of an initiative that you think is about equity or belonging. Keep your hand raised if you felt like you could have led that initiative. Right, fewer hands. We provide resources to help people learn how to do that. So if you're looking for a partner, if you want some support in that work, reach out to Northstar after you fill out that survey. Thank you all so much. Is it this one? Sorry, of course it's in order.
Okay, I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Zola. I am the current Youth Mappers Communication Specialist, and I am a Graduate Research Assistant at West Virginia University. I am originally from Malawi, so it was interesting to see some maps from Malawi earlier on. I think I saw a couple of them, so I was like, oh my gosh, I know that place. So I'm here to present about Youth Mappers. What is Youth Mappers? It is an international network of student-led university mapping chapters. It strives at improving the digital literacy and capacity of different university students around the world by introducing them and building the GIS skills. And in turn, the students start to contribute to initiatives and projects that are centered on food security, disease prevention, disaster management, and different other things. So basically, the SDGs. Youth Mappers is funded by USAID, and its founding organizations and its founding organizations, Arizona State University, Texas Tech University, West Virginia University, and George Washington University. Youth Mappers put people on the map that would have otherwise been not on the map. So how many Youth Mappers do we have, and where are they? We have over 5,000 students that can claim that they're Youth Mappers. We have 370 chapters around the world in 72 countries, and our map shows where those chapters are. So how do we do it? How do we engage the students? How do we build them to become mappers? That slide wasn't supposed to do that. It's okay. We have featured projects. So USAID missions in the different countries have different objectives, and they have different projects that involve mapping. They involve the different Youth Mapper chapters that are in their respective countries. So the students have the opportunity to have an experience in working on projects under that. We have partner initiatives. USAID has implementing partners in different countries, but also there are other organizations that simply do work similar to what we do, so they come in and partner with Youth Mappers. We have like the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, Red Cross, and Doctors Without Borders, organizations like those, and hopefully after these presentations, organizations in this room as well. Local capacity building. When we start a Youth Mappers chapter, or when they apply to have a Youth Mappers chapter, we train them on how to work in their communities, teach them the different technical skills that they need, and in turn, they also become trainers of other people. So it's like a trickle-down effect. They learn different leadership skills, program management, communication skills, and anything that really involves you to work in the different industries in the world. As I said, Youth Mappers is student-led, so we definitely have chapter-led mapping. The students identify a problem in their communities, they come up with a project, and they implement it. And it is through these projects that they're able to showcase their situatedness. Basically, they use the different skills that they get from us in their context. They're able to represent the challenges that they face and that reflect their lived experiences. We have student scholarships in form of leadership fellowships, research fellowships, and ambassadorships. We also have the Youth Mappers Academy. The Youth Mappers Academy is an online learning platform that allows students to get access to different resources in order to enhance their technical skills, their leadership skills, or anything that they need that is geospatial. And they get cool badges from the American Geographical Society, so that's very encouraging for the students. So as you can see, our framework of some of the things that we do, it doesn't focus on one thing. It's not just creating a map for a certain project and we're done. We work on the different aspects of an individual, just not the technical skills, the soft skills, the communication skills, how to plan, team management, collaboration, and stuff like that. So that takes us now to our motto. We don't just build maps, we build mappers. We bring about the holistic development of these students in the geospatial world and prepare them to enter the geospatial community, ready to work in all the companies that are here today. So you've heard about what Youth Mappers does for me. In the next minute or so, I'll let you see the Youth Mappers in action. It's a glimpse of our documentary that Marie had mentioned, and the QR code is in the program.
When you can't see a problem, you can't address it. So being unmapped can mean you don't exist.
These communities that are not on the map are left out in developmental strides. So it's quite a scary thing for communities not to be on the map.
What we wanted to do was create data for the world by having young people and university students at the core of the mapping project. We are engaging residents and students who live there into the solution.
The beauty of Youth Mappers is it is not restrictive of one's background.
As a woman, I felt that it has given me a voice to speak.
They are contributing to bringing the world to a global village.
I get to collaborate with my fellow youths around the world for a common purpose.
We don't just build maps,
we build mappers.
I thought that was great. So please use the QR code to watch the whole documentary, to see the students in action and to see the impact of going in to train them and giving them the skills to start working on the different problems in their countries even before they graduate. So going back to the theme of the symposium, I'm going to share about an ongoing project that the Youth Mappers are involved in that involves agriculture. So it's the Tanzania Crop Mapping Project. I think in the morning we had a lot of presentations that talked about using AI and machine learning to forecast yields, to estimate yields and things like those. And some of the data that we need in that process in order to have accurate estimates is ground truth data. And who collects the ground truth data? The people on the ground. So this project itself is a partnership between USDA, USAID, and Youth Mappers. The goal of the project is to collect ground truth data that will aid in the estimation of yields and crop identification that USDA conducts. So these are the areas of interest: Arusha, Dodoma, and Mwanza. These areas of interest were chosen by USDA and its other partners, but other things like the availability of high-resolution satellite imagery, that the data then will help to also see whether the classification is accurate or not. And another thing that was involved is looking at the crop calendar in Tanzania. As we know, we have farmers in the building. Crops grow at different times in the year, and it is important for the crops to be identified during the time that they are mature, and therefore for us to get accurate information of the estimates. So the important part, student involvement. The students were involved in the planning and implementation phases of this project. They were trained on how to use the different tools, like Kobo Collect, in order to implement an agricultural survey. They used other open source tools, which is what Youth Mappers really encourages. We use a lot of open source tools. That's why the students, it's easy for them to get involved for the navigation around the different parts of Tanzania that they went to collect this data. And they basically just got the skills that they need to identify the problem and implement it, to talk to the local partners, to navigate the challenges that they had met in the field and anything else that is really needed to run a successful project. They were expected to collect 300 data points for all the crops of interest in all the areas that they went to, and over 400 data points for other crops that they had to differentiate from the crops of interest. So this project is an example of how organizations come in and involve the youth mappers in order to work on something that will actually affect a government, a country, or somebody's everyday life. Apart from involving them in the different projects that we involve them in, we also give them a voice. Instead of us reporting everything that they do for them, we give them the voice for them to report it themselves and share with the world what they do. This takes me to the Youth Mappers book. We recently published an open source book. Please, open access book. Download it. The QR code is also there, and the QR code has everything else, all the links for everything else that you need to know about Youth Mappers. Reach out to us so that you can open a Youth Mappers chapter. Those the two chapters are examples of chapters that actually talk about food security and everything that is actually related to the theme of the symposium. So the chapters in the book are all contributions from the students themselves. So the students are the authors of the different chapters. So as you can see the development of the student from the beginning of the projects to the end, to the point that they're even able to report and share their work and the methodologies that they used. So that's me today. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
I think I should be okay. Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Zola. And just to wrap up her overview of Youth Mappers, I want to talk a little bit about how Youth Mappers connects with USAID's objectives, since USAID is the primary funder of the Youth Mappers program. So the Youth Mappers program works at the intersection of USAID's priorities of youth, digital development, and higher education, while addressing many domains of international development, including agriculture and food security, environment, gender equality, water and sanitation, and humanitarian assistance. And so, along with addressing USAID development objectives, there's also the fact that the students themselves, as Zola just talked about, gain practical experience in high-demand tech skills, which helps us to address the digital skills divide, where students in low and middle income countries may not have opportunities to build their digital literacy. And youth are also empowered to take on positions of leadership in their own communities and engage with local, regional, and international stakeholders. And then finally, as you saw in the documentary preview, one of the end results is that USAID and its partners gain access to geospatial data for undermapped areas. And so what do we mean by an undermapped area? Well, in the US, we have Google Maps, and everything is pretty much mapped, it seems, right? We can see building footprints, we can see roads, we can see amenities in our communities, but this is totally not the case for many other countries, and especially in poor and/or rural communities, there's simply a lack of that base geospatial data of buildings and roads. And the implication of this, as you saw in the documentary, is that these communities are often left out of development and humanitarian assistance because they're not on the map. And so that's what we mean by the digital data divide. When we have geospatial data for these communities, we can enhance our decision-making in international development. And also, as Zola emphasized, the ethos of Youth Mappers is to create open geospatial data on open platforms. So that means that almost all of the time, unless there are privacy concerns about the data is uploaded to platforms like OpenStreetMap, which is free and openly available to the public. Anyone can go in and edit the data or download it for any use. And so at USAID, we call that a digital public good because it's available to the public. So now that I've talked about USAID and Youth Mappers, I want to spend most of my presentation talking about my involvement with the Youth Mappers program before I joined USAID. And so I'm going to talk about the Youth Mappers chapter that I started at Vassar College called Hudson Valley Mappers. So let's first talk a little bit about Poughkeepsie, New York. So Poughkeepsie is located in Dutchess County in the Hudson Valley. It's midway between the state capital of Albany and New York City. And the city of Poughkeepsie, which neighbors the town of Poughkeepsie, is a Rust Belt city with an industrial past. You might be surprised to learn that Poughkeepsie was actually a center for whale processing in the 19th century. It was also a center for paper milling, shipping, and brewing. And then in the 1940s, the arrival of IBM and other manufacturing and design firms brought an influx of jobs and development to the area. But then in the 1960s, the city experienced the effects of suburbanization and white flight, and major industries relocated to outside the city. Ultimately, this resulted in a higher concentration of low-income communities of color and a cityscape of abandoned factories and buildings. In recent years, Poughkeepsie has transitioned to a service economy and undergone revitalization, but socioeconomic and racial inequalities remain high and in some cases are deepening. So to address these inequalities, the city has a very robust network of community-based organizations, which you'll hear more about in a second. But let's talk about Vassar College. So Vassar College was founded in the town of Poughkeepsie by the beer tycoon Matthew Vassar in 1861, which is why our mascot is the Brewers, because he was a beer brewer. It's one of the historic Seven Sister Colleges, which were the first elite women's colleges in the US, and it became coeducational in 1969. So although today Vassar is ranked among the top universities in the nation for financial aid, Vassar's elite legacy and status as a predominantly white institution mean that relations between the college and the neighboring city of Poughkeepsie have often been quite strained. It's common, actually, for students to never visit the city of Poughkeepsie during their entire time at Vassar, despite the fact that it's less than a mile away, and that's because of perceptions of the city as unsafe or lacking in attractions. But one office at Vassar that has sought to bridge that divide between Vassar and Poughkeepsie is the Office of Community Engaged Learning, which facilitates semester-long internships for students at various organizations in Poughkeepsie as part of their coursework. Vassar geography students have frequently participated in these internships and provided GIS support to these organizations that do not have the financial resources to hire paid GIS specialists for themselves. But in 2018, when I first heard about the Youth Mappers program, there was still a significant gap between the amount of up-to-date geospatial data on on-the-ground conditions that organizations needed and what individual student interns could deliver in the course of a semester. So our Youth Mappers chapter was born out of a need to formalize, consolidate, and expand the volunteer geographic support that Vassar students were already providing to the college's community partners in Poughkeepsie. So this is where Hudson Valley Mappers, our Youth Mappers chapter, comes in. So I put together a little timeline that shows the steps that we took to create our Youth Mappers chapter. I first learned about Youth Mappers in summer 2018 when I was completing an internship with the team I now work with at the USAID Geo Center. Hearing about the Youth Mappers model of conducting community geography, I knew immediately that it would be a perfect fit for Vassar. So I pitched the idea of Youth Mappers to our Earth Science and Geography department and the Office of Community Engaged Learning. I was really privileged to be offered the opportunity to serve as Vassar's first community geographer through a work study position. And we also started applying for grants to support the community mapping work that we were planning. And then in the third step, you can see that we submitted the Youth Mappers chapter application. I worked with a few students and professors to do this. And then we kind of simultaneously were engaging with the local community, using Vassar's existing connections with the different organizations, and meeting with them to understand their GIS needs, and starting to develop projects. So I'm going to take you through a few projects that Hudson Valley Mappers has worked on now for the past 5 years. So I was there for the first 2 years of the chapter, and it's since continued and grown in the past 3 years since I graduated. But our very first project was in collaboration with the City of Poughkeepsie's planning team. As we were starting our Youth Mappers chapter, we learned that the city had received funds to plant new trees, but their most recent street tree inventory, which included sites for tree planting, had been completed in 2006. So the data was extremely out of date. And as you might expect, the geographic distribution of street trees reflects socioeconomic and racial inequalities in the city of Poughkeepsie. As I calculated in one of my GIS classes, the richer and whiter a neighborhood in Poughkeepsie, the more street trees per capita, and therefore the more ecosystem services and health benefits provided to residents. So this is an issue of environmental justice and equity. And in collaboration with the city's planning team and local experts and residents, we mapped tree planting sites on foot, as you can see in the image on the right, using the Esri survey tool, Survey 123. Then we provided the data to the city's planning team to help inform their selection of planting sites. You can see a QR code in the bottom right of the screen. This will take you to a link tree with blog posts that I co-wrote with our different community partners about all of the projects that I'm talking about today. So our next major project was in support of the housing justice nonprofit Hudson River Housing. For years, Hudson River Housing had administered annual walking surveys of local businesses and vacancies in Poughkeepsie, but these surveys were not standardized and did not include a geospatial component. So we helped incorporate mapping into their inventory over multiple years, and we mobilized teams of Vassar volunteers to collect the data, as you can see here. So for the first time, Hudson River Housing was able to use maps to visualize changes in the commercial landscape over time. And my third project that I'd like to share is training local high schoolers on community GIS. So in 2019, we received a grant from Vassar that enabled us to embark on a year-long community geography collaboration with the program No Child Left Inside, which is a Cornell cooperative extension program that hires students from Poughkeepsie High School and trains them to be youth environmental educators. One of the requirements of the program is that the students create and implement an environmentally themed community project every year, and that year they selected waste disposal and management as their focus. So after we heard about their focus topic for their project, we helped them brainstorm how they might incorporate GIS into it, and then we led interactive field mapping and survey design workshops for the students. They used those skills to then build a survey that they could use in their community, as you can see on the right. And one really important thing to emphasize is that in our work in community geography in Poughkeepsie, we really saw and continue to see ourselves as listeners and facilitators, which means that we must prioritize the actual community members' priorities and needs for their neighborhoods. And so ultimately, this looked like us providing the technical training for the students, but then they actually went off and built their own survey for data collection based on what they thought would be most useful for their community. And the last project that I worked on as a student with Hudson Valley Mappers was right at the start of the pandemic. So just as everything was shutting down, we began consulting with community partners that we had already worked with for a couple years on how we could use our GIS skills to meaningfully engage in supporting local residents. So based on those conversations, we decided to create a web map of community resources and services in Dutchess County with a focus on food and health resources. Our community partners kept telling us that it was becoming difficult for residents to keep track of all of the services available to them with rapidly changing information spread across different news sites, web pages, and social media accounts. But across all of these different resources, not a single one that I saw included a map that would enable residents to easily visualize where resources were located. So there's a lot to say about this project, but one highlight is that we set up the map, which is an ArcGIS Online web map, in a way so that volunteers did not need to have any GIS background in order to update it, and this is because we linked it to a Google Sheets spreadsheet. So we formed a team of students, faculty, and community partners, most of whom had never worked with GIS before, but they then took on the responsibility of adding and updating data for different features on the map, like food pantries and meal programs, grocery stores, restaurants offering takeout and delivery, COVID testing facilities, and the list goes on. And by the way, if you check out the link tree here, I actually co-wrote a book chapter in the book that Zola just presented about this project. So please let me know if you want to know more about that. Okay, and then the last project I'd like to highlight is that, well, first of all, my 2 years of serving as a community geographer at Vassar were just the beginning of 5 years now of intensive community geography at the college. And this has been fueled by student enthusiasm as well as support from geography faculty and the Office of Community Engaged Learning. So one recent example of a project is that Hudson Valley Mappers collaborated with Cornell Cooperative Extension to create an interactive web map of the Hudson Valley food system, which you can access using the QR code. If you want to check it out, there are over 40 data layers falling into many different themes, as you can see on the map, including food and farming, institutions, demographics, equity and access, and more. And so as Hudson Valley Mappers was evaluating different data sources, they realized that a lot of them were incomplete or inadequate. And so they did the work of compiling, cleaning, and mapping data sets from a variety of trusted sources and building this final map. And in fact, I have a pop-up for the Poughkeepsie Farm project showing, and that's because Hudson Valley Mappers is also providing support to the farm, Poughkeepsie Farm project, and they're using GIS to help ensure that the farm's outreach efforts best align with where food insecurity is highest. So I hope the project examples that I've shared illustrate the vast possibilities of community geography, including in relation to the conference theme of feeding our future planet. So to close this story about Vassar and Hudson Valley Mappers, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that I engaged in this community geography work from a position of privilege as a white person who is not from the city of Poughkeepsie. So I do hope that my work helped to challenge historical divisions between the Vassar and Poughkeepsie communities. But I welcome any critiques of the approach that I shared, and I'll use any critiques to inform my future community geography work. But I guess to summarize on one slide, I see these as the core practices of community geography. So focusing on building reciprocal, long-term relationships with community partners, sometimes that takes the form of projects that are more focused on the process of collaborating and less on a distinct data outcome. And it's also great to identify local champions who get your work and can promote it within the community. Make sure that you're implementing projects on the terms of the community partners themselves. Like I said earlier, act as a facilitator and listener, take a step back and listen. And then, as I discussed in my initial slides, it is very important to consider the dynamics of the relationship between the university and the city or town. So to conclude, a call to action for any universities in the audience who are interested in starting Youth Mappers chapters. It's a very simple process. There's a short application form that you can access from our website. And as you can see from my presentation, you can design the chapter to fit the needs of your own community. And so to conclude, once you register your chapter, chapters will then be eligible for different funded opportunities for students, like Zola mentioned, such as the Research and Leadership Fellowship programs. And with that, I will turn the floor back to Marie.
All right, I hope you're inspired, and I expect next time when I'm in St. Louis, there will be at least one, maybe 2 or 3 Youth Mapper chapters. That's your assignment. I have a question, but I'm sure you'll have questions. So I'll ask mine, and this is your opportunity to think about what you want to ask the panelists. We have about 10 more minutes. When I think about, pardon me? We okay? Okay. When I think about the power of maps, one of the revolutionary changes of the last 20 years is the democratization of mapping. For most of the 20th century, mapping was very top-down. A few people controlled the levers, and a handful of people actually produced the product, and then they got distributed, and it was God. It was a piece of paper, you folded it, or you didn't fold it well, and that's the truth. What's happened, and this, I think, group is an example of how mapping and digitalization has opened up new ways of mapping, new kinds of maps, new ways of gathering data, and also engaging local communities. So my question to the three of you is, as you think about the future of mapping, what does it mean to have different mappers working at the community level, working at the global level? We heard a lot about getting images from satellites, but what happens when you ground mapping? What kind of information do you get out of that, and how does that help build community and change places in a positive way?
Okay. I have a lot to say on this, but I'll be quick. So I think, for one thing, I was having this conversation with a few people outside. Why are there maps of our building footprints and street lights and street poles? It's because it's some organization's business that it's important that we have that, and they generate revenue off of it, even local governments. But it's almost nobody's business. The community is almost nobody's business, except maybe community-based organizations, and they often are reliant upon other organizations that have GIS to produce data for them, and then they have to hope that that data is going to come back to them on their terms, in the ways that they want, reflective of their experiences. Well, when you democratize this, now they have the power to own the business of their community, to collect and capture information about the conditions and experiences and the outcomes in their communities as they see it. And I often talk about equity in three ways. It's an analytical process, it's an outcome, it's a way you measure, but it's also about ownership. And so giving ownership of the maps and data to communities is a huge part of what we need to do differently. And by doing so, we see different stories and a different reality.
Yeah, involving the youth on the ground gives them a voice. It also gives them a sense of urgency. It just, as we say, a sense of belonging. Every point, every building that they add on the map is their voice being heard. They're able to identify what the problem is. It's different if somebody else comes to give you the map of where you stay. What a building means to somebody who lives in the community isn't the same thing that the building means to somebody who lives outside. So it gives you a perspective of the needs and challenges of the community by hearing the voices of the community members themselves through the maps that they create. So involving the youth, since they are the ones that are the next generation and the next leaders, involving them now as they grow allows them to think of all these problems and challenges that they have been part of solving at a young age during university to go on as they go on to their professional careers in the future. So we want them to feel that it's their business. It's my business. I need to do this. I'm not waiting for somebody else to come from elsewhere to do it. And hopefully that also brings down a trickle-down effect where we send it to more youth afterwards. And to avoid certain problems as well, because if you're part of a situation, you don't want to mess it up. Mm-hmm. If you're mapping out about waste management in your community, the moment you want to throw something on the ground, you'll be like, no, I walked around this community and mapped this out. I'm not going to contribute to another point of improper waste management. So hopefully that trickle-down effect happens.
So I spent a lot of time at Vassar reading critiques of international development. So when I started working at USAID, I think I was a little jaded. And I think that Youth Mappers as a USAID funded program really challenges a lot of traditional notions of international development in equipping the youth in the communities that USAID works in, like Zola said, with the technical skills and opportunities to conduct problem solving of issues themselves. And so it's just so different from a traditional model of USAID going into a community, conducting some data collection, conducted by outsiders to the community who don't have a sense of what the community priorities are. And then hopefully that data would make it back to the community, but with the Youth Mappers model, we know that the community is at the forefront of the project development and implementation, and they are the ones giving consent to have their communities mapped and then to have access to the data via OpenStreetMap and other sources. So I think it's just vastly different from traditional models of international development.
It certainly adds diversity to the geospatial ecosystem, as we've been talking about. Questions? This is your chance. Raise your hand. Yes, in the far back. Why don't we take 2 or 3 questions? That would go ahead. Read. Woohoo!
Yeah, thank you. And we're very excited to hear that UMSL will plan to start a chapter. That's wonderful news. Yeah, so to address your question, which is about how do researchers partner with Youth Mappers chapters who would be able to collect some of that ground truth data. So first of all, one point that we like to emphasize is that chapters engage in projects that we present to them out of their own interest. So they're volunteers. We can't make them do anything. We simply invite them to engage in projects. So in the case that you're presenting of a researcher wanting to connect with some Youth Mappers chapters, that process would start with the researcher coming to our Youth Mappers leadership team, and then we would facilitate that connection with the chapters. But usually for that type of involved work where there would be field mapping and it would take a significant amount of labor on the students' part, we really want to make sure that they're getting something out of it, right? Because our motto is we don't just build maps, we build mappers. So we want to make sure that they're getting professional development experience, and then if it's a significant amount of time or transportation funds or whatever the expenses for the students are, we would ask for some funding just to make sure that the opportunity would be financially accessible for them. Zola, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered everything. So ideally, if you want help from the Youth Mappers, you should also be ready to help them. They need to understand that they should be able to say, I took part in this project from the University of Missouri, and this is what I learned, or this project changed my life or my career path in this way. So if you present something like that to us, then we'll definitely be willing to connect you with the youth mappers. But if you come in as like, we just want cheap labor, and no. So it's the students at the center and in front of all the projects.
I have time for one more question. Oh boy. Lee, I gotta say yes to go to.
This is an easy one. Clinton, could you tell me where to find the damn QR code? Because I just look it on my phone.
Can we go back to the slides with the? I'll walk around with it. There's a Youth Mappers QR code, and then there's a. You can also go to North Star of GIS. Yeah. That
Okay.
was easy. Yeah.
Then there's one for Bob. Final question.
Final question was a follow-up. One, are the three of you going to be here tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. There's two follow-ups. And we don't have to answer them now because I know we're running out of time, but I'd be really interested in talking to youth mappers about if they do start a program here, how we might use that also to make other connections. So you'll see Sakita Armstrong and talking about Gateway Global, working with high school students and making connections in these underrepresented communities. I think there's a lot of there. That's really exciting to me. And then Clinton, I don't know if you were exposed to Harris Stowe State University ran a GIS civic summer camp last summer, the inaugural one, they're continuing it, but they're doing it as an HBCU, so they're bringing in students from other HBCUs. A lot of what they're doing is teaching teachers. So if you're not connected to that, Jesse, raise your hand. They walked out to visit.
Yeah, I was hoping to come here and get connected with folks doing that programming for sure.
Yeah, we started this saying these things are really successful if you meet people you haven't known, you stay connected, and there's some really strong and powerful, I think, ways that people that are trying to grow this ecosystem would want to partner with all that you're doing. I just commend you for your leadership and your passion.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you all, and let's give them a round of applause.
Okay, we're just about at the end. Two very fast lightning talks. Same thing as earlier. 20 slides, 5 minutes each. And to start us off is Dr. Mary Fernandez, who's going to talk to us about how a unified plant genome project will save us.
Hi, I'm Mary Fernandez, president and co-founder of Solus AgroSciences. We provide a full-service R&D platform for ag tech companies, or anyone really. And today I'm going to tell you why we need a Green Revolution 2.0 and how we can make it happen. So this is me in a cotton field in Texas. I'm a plant biologist and a geneticist. I love plants and I love genes, and I haven't seen a plant or a gene that isn't utterly fascinating to me. So I'm going to talk to you about, this is really the gist of my talk, why I think we should sequence the genomes of as many plant species as possible, and then how we can use that information to feed the world. So bear with me. If this seems a little bit abstract, here's something you're familiar with. The russet potato, a common potato, also called Solanum tuberosum. Did you know that potato is the fourth most important staple crop? A staple crop is a crop that is eaten regularly and provides a significant amount of energy and nutrition. So potato is fourth after corn, rice, wheat, and wheat. And 4 of these crops provide 75% of the energy needs for 5 billion people. So that's a very important statistic. Now, behold a tiny fungus called Phytophthora infestans. This fungus is tiny, but it's mighty because it causes a disease in potato that's really awful called late blight. Now, this looks like a little fungusy white mold and millions of spores, which was microscopically shown there. This is what a late blight infected potato looks like, completely inedible. And you might recall that, we've learned about the potato famine of 1845, which caused over 2 million deaths in Ireland. Now, this potato fungus, late blight fungus, is still alive and well, and it can cause the same disease anytime, anywhere. The only thing preventing it is that we kill it with a ton of different fungicides. These are just the top 10. Now, look at this tiny potato. It's found in Peru. It's called Solanum bulbocastanum, and it is completely resistant to late blight. All right, so breeders have tried to integrate or cross and bring these traits into regular potato commercial varieties with not much success. But what if we sequence the complete genome of this species and then use gene editing tools to quickly and precisely insert these resistant genes into current commercial varieties of potato? Well, that would be a game changer, because not only would we dramatically reduce fungicide use, but we would obtain commercially new varieties of potato with different traits, high yielding, pathogen resistant, frost tolerant, drought tolerant. And this is going to be fantastic, because we will have to feed 10 billion people by 2050 in the face of climate change, which means we will need to grow 60% more food by 2050. That is a tall order. Look at the anticipated production needs by 2050. This is in the face of climate change, shrinking land and water resources. So we had a similar situation, an inflection point in the 1960s when Dr. Norman Borlaug introduced and ushered in the first green revolution, right? It was a massive increase in food production using high-yielding crop varieties developed by breeding crosses, intensive use of fertilizers, and increased irrigation. Now, we can rely on these same methods to feed the next wave of 3 billion people. Why? Because traditional breeding just takes too long. A new pathogen can come, like a COVID pandemic, and wipe out an entire crop before breeders can get the first cross out. Where reduced land and water and fertilizer production is not great. So we need a gene revolution that will help usher in the second green revolution. Basically, we need to sequence the genomes, like I said, identify key genes, and edit the genomes. And we can achieve this, really. It's very doable, because sequencing is getting cheaper. You've heard of Moore's Law. We can now sequence a genome for $100. Cutting-edge gene editing tools are getting more and more commonplace, like CRISPR enzymes and others. And we have an untapped source of natural genetic variation, 6,000 varieties of potato alone. So I'm proposing that we need a plant genome project like the Human Genome Project we had 20 years ago, an overarching single project that brings together various consortia and streamlines sequencing and unlocks the genome. We can do this and get started right here in St. Louis. We have institutions like Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, WashU, big companies like Bayer, Bunge, and companies like Solus that can provide the editing. So I think if we do this, we will unlock a lot of potential, and we will be able to transform agriculture again, feed a growing population, and sustain the planet. If you would like to learn more, thank you very much for listening. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fernandez. And next in line is returning to us again, Dr. Alan Trout, who's going to discuss beating crop disease by working smarter, not harder.
Hello again. As a statistician, I've had this opportunity to work on diverse projects and be able to make people's lives easier. Today, in this presentation, I'll be talking about crop disease. Yeah, same thing that just happened. My solution is a little bit different, though. I'm going to talk about 3 ways of how I do this smarter. Now, the numbers here, when we talk about disease, there's this big impact on yield. That yield could be anywhere between 70% to upwards of 30% in crop loss across these 5 major crops. You probably didn't know about that 17.2%. Now you do. One of the key things, though, is we just learned in 2050 there's this projection that the need for more food is around 60% more than we have today. Do those numbers. If we can get half of that down with fungicides or pesticides, that would be awesome. Now, the first step to being able to mitigate mitigate disease is understanding and scouting, getting data. Now, scouting means you get into the field before there's a disease so that you can make informed decisions. This is a bit of a challenge. Now, I came from a biological company that dealt in seeds, and I got to learn about this scouting process. More like I got to suffer and walk a mile in their shoes, literally. They would walk from plot to plot, row to row, sometimes field to field. They would have a pen, some notebooks, some instruments to measure, And then sometimes they would take some monitors about what is the temperature out, what is the notes of disease pressure, severity, what type of disease is it. All of this while being bitten by bugs and attacked by plants. Think Little Shop of Horrors. Okay, well, in any case, there was this idea of how do we make this smarter? How do we make this take less than 8 hours to an hour? How do we make notes actionable? We identified 3 challenges that we wanted to go after. One was, can we make note-taking automated? 2, can we understand that we can get this data in a fast and efficient way when it's actually going to make an impact to yield? And 3, can we do this in a smart, optimized way with limited resources? Drones and equipping them with these nice cameras called multispectral cameras and LiDAR made note-taking faster. It was way more efficient. When it came to getting timely data, machine learning was the key. Being able to predict when it's going to be time to get that data before it's too late, and essentially disease takes root in plants and can no longer get yield from them. We did predictions of crop stage in order to get to those scouted fields in a smart way. Finally, these are hundreds of fields. We're talking 2 million acres. How do you do this in a smart way that you can optimize resources with the least amount of people and drones? Well, operations research is the key. Operations research meant that there wasn't a scout manager who was getting sleeping disorders because they weren't sleeping well. It was automatically generated through the application. Now, in addition to this information, we also provided stuff like health. Can we look at a map of where is the health, or is it a good plant or a bad plant in specific areas of a field? And also included some pictures, because a picture is worth more than 1,000 words when it comes to understanding disease. Now, another thing is when you think about disease, there are 3 parts to it. One of them is the environment. Do you have an environment that can support the disease? In other words, is it humid out? Is it hot out? So we provide some stuff like precipitation and soil to get a more holistic view of what is the health of your field in a snapshot that is at the fingertips of a farmer. Now, we didn't stop there. As I said, I'm all about predictions. So we went farther and said, what if we could predict it's going to be a very risky season ahead of time? The key to this was using bands from different satellites and marrying this with weather data. These 2 things were able to unlock and be proactive in understanding where is there going to be a disease and what a farmer could actually do to mitigate that, whether it be related to corn blight or other types of diseases. Risk modeling is challenging, and being able to do this was a really fun experience for us. At the end of the day, we've been able to see this application take root across 25 million acres and across 7 different states, and it's been used for over 2 years. One of the key things is that we at OCR are about making people's lives easier, and we see that geospatial science and technology is the key to get there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Trapp and Dr. Fernandez. And now to end our day, UMSL Chancellor Dr. Kristen Sobolik and AGS Chairman Dr. Christopher Tucker have some concluding remarks. Kristen and Chris.
Thank you, John. And, thank you, everybody, for spending the day with us here with the University of Missouri St. Louis and the American Geographical Society here on our campus. We so enjoyed the talks. We've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. And that's always a fantastic day, because I think maybe sometimes chancellors, we don't necessarily learn a lot every single day. So it's always good to take that in. But one of the things that I have learned is it's always my privilege as chancellor to get up in front of groups and, frankly, take credit for a lot of hard work by a lot of other people. So I want to make sure that the people that have been in the trenches for, I want to say a long time, but actually we have been able to pull this together in a fairly short time, but there's a lot of people that are in the trenches on this that have been really working hard to make sure that this is a success. And I think that that's actually happened. So I just want to call out a few people for that. One is, I know that you had the pleasure to meet my Chief of Staff, Adela Jones, but she has been definitely in the trenches to make sure that this event is pulled off. So Adela, great job. Also, Susan Elliott, who is in our advancement and executive events area, has worked alongside Adela and team, as well as Chelsea Nolu, Amanda Zimmer, as well from our events team. So they do a great job. They're called executive events, and that means I get to make sure that they're deployed in all the right places. Also, Jason Starr and his team oversee our fantastic Two Hill Performing Arts Center. They are rock stars. So Jason and team, great job as always. And you know, I want to call out too our UMSL Geospatial Collaborative crew that are here. Dr. and Director Rita Ammer is here, as well as our Provost Steve Burbridge and Chris Spilling and Shannon Peoples and Bob Sharp. So Geospatial Collaborative, great job. And then I also want to have a shout out for the AGS team that's in the trenches. And of course, I'm always appreciative of John Karnowski and Chris Tucker, as well as Marie Price. But I tell you, behind the scenes, James Mallinson and Nicole Aviesi have been working really hard, and good job, team. So I want to see you out at our reception, and for those of you that are coming tomorrow, you're going to have a real treat because we're going to engage with our teachers. And I remember somebody earlier in the symposium had indicated that it is all about teaching and passing that information on so that we can disseminate that and get that to the next generation and move forward. So thank you, everybody.
So I'm only going to say one thing. Thank you so much for coming today, for tuning in to Geography 2050. Please remain tuned in. Just check in at geography2050.org every so often. If you're on Twitter, pay attention to @geography2050. We will have another event in the fall in New York City, and we're looking forward to reprising this again next year. So thank you so much, and there are adult beverages out either of those doors, and I look forward to tipping a glass with each of you as long as you can stay for the next hour or so. Thank you so much.